Greetings, this is Jim Lindsay. This is a CIS lesson, and in it I'll be talking to you about the GreenLantern project, and it's on the page with all of the other assignments, the syllabus, quiz, papers, and homework page of the Blackboard site. And when you look at that project, you'll see that it's a folder. So this is similar to some of the assignments you've had in the preceding weeks, where when you open that folder, you'll see that there are three things inside of the folder. You have the assignment itself, where you submit the assignment, and details about it. And then as you read these details, it says you are assigned to one of two groups. And the two groups for this project are the Norfolk group, like Norfolk, Virginia, and Redding group, like Redding, California. And so there's two different cities here, Norfolk or Redding. You have East Coast, you have West Coast. And so I wanted to make those as different as possible as I could from each other. And so you have an East Coast group and a West Coast group. You have your names listed here, telling you which group you are assigned to. And as you open these folders, you're going to find instructions as well as support files that you'll need to complete the assignment. Again, make sure if you're in this group that you do this version of the project, and if you're in this group down here, do that version of the assignment. This is due at 11:59 p.m. on July 31st. You're watching the tutorial for this project right now. And then again, the detailed instructions and the support files are down here in these specific folders. So let's take a look at one of these. We'll go with Norfolk this time, and you'll see that there's a Word document, which is the instructions, and then a zip file. And the zip file is several things all put together in one single item. And so let me download these to my computer. I'm just going to save these to my desktop. And let me show you how to work with, especially with this zip file. You guys have been doing work with zip files, so I think you're comfortable with it. But I want to make sure. So I've downloaded these files to my desktop, and I'll now pretend that I'm in the Norfolk group and I'm going to do work with this, and go from there. So there's the instruction set. That's a Word document. I'll just open it up in just a moment. But this zipped file, the way that you would get its contents is you double click it to open it, and then you see there's a folder inside of it. Drag that folder to where you're going to work from, and you just get rid of the zip file from there. And then you'll have a folder called Norfolk. If you look inside of it, there are multiple Word files. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different Word files. These are all stories. You also have a reflection paper item right here, and you have a publisher document that has a style in it. And so as we get to the instructions, you'll see where these different files right here, these 8 files right here, come into play with what you do for the assignment. So now let me open the instructions. And again, I'm working from the Norfolk folder. In the Redding, California folder, you have a similar setup. It's just you have different stories. You have different, all this information down here is different for you. And so the documents that come from the two different groups should be really, starkly different from one another. All right. So what your scenario here is that you are the editor of a newsletter, and it's called in this case it's called The Spectator. In the case of Redding, California, I've forgotten the name of it there, but all of this information about the newsletter or an organization, all this information in here is different. There's different locations. You have East Coast, West Coast, etc. So make sure you make your newsletter in accordance with what you're seeing here. There's more information here possibly than you would need. You have to look at this, and if there's stuff that's in here that's more than you need, then you have to make that decision about what you're going to cut out. All right, here's information about the organization itself, and there's like a similar entry and in the other version of this. This portion right down here is where you get to the where it talks about the details about exactly what does this document need to include? What are the requirements for this thing? Well, you need to make a, let me zoom in so you can read it better. This needs to be a Microsoft Publisher newsletter template that you select, and you need to save it with your name, and then it should be newsletter. I will change that. Presto changeo, there you go. That's the magic of TV. So you have your name, newsletters, name of what your document should be. You need to modify the masthead, and the masthead is the top of the document, and that's talked about in the newsletter tutorial or the newsletter video. That masthead is basically the top of the front page. Like think of like the New York Times or the Courier Journal or some newspaper perhaps that you are used to looking at. That top of it, that welcome at the beginning of the front page, that's called the masthead. So you need to modify its template text with information from this case, and there's like a volume number, an issue number that's part of this case, and so you modify the masthead accordingly. You need to include articles, and I'll show you where to get those in just a second. You need to import the articles and put those in your newsletter. You get to choose which ones. You get to choose the order of them. You get to choose how many of those. Make sure that you create a title for the stories, and as we'll look at 2 or 3 of those in the support files in just a minute here, and you can kind of see where you're going to be, how you're going to use those. But you don't have to write the stories for this newsletter. That's not the point. The point is you're the editor. You have a staff of writers, and they're providing you with these documents, and then you just pull those in through the import process in Publisher, and then you format it. So you're basically laying it out and formatting it as opposed to actually creating the articles. You need to insert at least one pull quote. Put some pull. You can put additional pull quotes in there if you want to, and again, those are covered in the tutorial as well. Pull quotes are use enough that it makes the document look good, but don't go crazy and put so many that it looks kind of silly. And that's going to be, kind of to your eye as you look at the page. You have to figure out, how many is that. And so want you to use the pull quote feature of Publisher. All right. Now we get to where you get to create some content for yourself. You can make announcements in the newsletter, and that could be like in the body, or that could be in the sidebars. And the sidebars are basically the sides of the page. If you want to do that in the middle, in the body, that's fine too. But you need to come up with some announcements, and there's some information in here at the top, at the top of the page, talking about events, talking about think about the time of year that your publication is for. You may be in August, you may be in November, you may be in March, you may be in April. Think about what events might be going on at that time of year, and you just make some stuff up. And then also you need to write a short personal message for your readers. Now this is the most commonly missed part of this assignment. It's the most commonly, for sure, missed part of this assignment. Make sure that you are using the spelling and grammar checker, and write more formally than more casually. People put stuff in here like it's written in a text message, with no punctuation, with no capitalization, and every single one of those starts dropping you by basically like about a letter grade. And so if this is a 60-point assignment, which it is, each one of those mistakes is going to cost you 6 points. And so by the time, and I count up to 3, and finally at 3 I just quit, because then at that point you've lost 3 letter grades. But I mean, you guys are 300. You're in a 300 level university course, and you need to know how to use commas and semicolons and periods and capitalized sentences and stuff like that. And so check your spelling and grammar, make sure that it's correct. And again, it's just a short passage, and essentially what you're saying in this part of the newsletter is, hey, I'm the new editor. I look forward to creating documents for you for the next year or however long you think you're going to do it. We hope you enjoy the issue. If you want to join our club, that sort of stuff. It doesn't have to be a lot of information. Certainly don't want a huge passage here, but some sort of short message, and you can include images and stuff like that in as part of your newsletter as well. And you can also refer to this calendar, which is the next bullet point. Like you can say, hey, look at the calendar below, or look at the calendar over on page so and so, and we have events coming up, and you can refer to those sorts of things. And so just tie this short personal message into the rest of the content within the newsletter. Try to, you're pretending at this point, but be thinking how you would actually do this if you were the editor of a newsletter. So that's a really commonly missed part of this assignment, and the cost of it can be pretty dear. Again, because of like the spelling and grammar mistakes, no matter where they happen within the newsletter, those carry a hefty weight. Calendar. You learned how to create a calendar in the newsletter tutorial, and so include a calendar, and on that calendar identify some dates where some things would be going on for this period of time that the newsletter covers. And I want you to create a new style, and this new style is called CIS 320, and it should look like that. And so once you've created this new style called CIS 320, and you learn how to do that in the tutorial video, use it somewhere in the document. So create this style and then highlight some text, and the usage of this new style in that part of your newsletter, as well as this Jim Lindsay style down here, that may contrast completely with the rest of the look of the newsletter. And I get that, I understand that. And the reason this is kind of a pretty ugly looking style. By the time you put this on the page, it really jumps out. So you don't have to strive to make your newsletter look good with this CIS 320 style or with the Jim Lindsay style. I made both of these styles really pretty hideous, just so I can, as soon as I look at your document, I can spot those. And so you need to create that style, use it somewhere on one of your pages. Likewise, you need to import the Jim Lindsay style, and you learned how to do that in the tutorial, and then use it somewhere in your document. And by the way, this is a 4-page template, which is when you create a template, a newsletter template, by default they're 4 pages. So you'll have the you have plenty of space to put some your articles in there, plus your calendar, plus your personal piece, plus some announcements. At that point, you run out of space, and so you basically need those 4 pages. You need to use images. Make sure that and just download those from the internet. You don't have to worry about citations for those, because this is a document you're giving to me, and nobody else is looking at these, so don't worry about citations as far as where you got the images from. But look for images that are appropriate for your stories. We've talked about the spelling and grammar. If the logo is present, if there's a publisher logo in your template, and there probably will be, please delete it. It's a pretty terrible looking little object, and it's been around, publisher has been around long enough that people have used the templates many times, and basically people recognize that and looks, oh, that looks kind of ugly. It's a little triangle pyramid looking thing. So get rid of that publisher logo if you see it. And also you can get rid of that table of contents, or please get rid of the table of contents. This is it's a 4-page document, and so we can go without the table of contents. It's on page 1. Typically, if you have a template that includes a table of contents, it's on page 1. Sometimes it's called inside this issue, but just right click it, delete that object, and get it out of your way. So those are the requirements. Where do you get the stories from? Where do you get this document that has the Jim Lindsay style? Let me show you where that comes from. That comes from the folder that you unzipped right here, this Norfolk or Reading folder that you unzipped. And when you open the folder, you'll see there is a Jim Lindsay style importme.pub. If you were to open it up, it just has a line of text at the top. There's a line of text up there, but that's what it looks like. And so what you're going to do, you'll leave it closed, but in Publisher, in your newsletter, you'll go through the style and import a style procedure to get that Jim Lindsay style into your document. Now, these stories right here, stories 3, 8, 13, 18, 23, 28, these are specific to the Norfolk version of this. In the Reading version, version of this assignment, you're going to have totally different stories, and it's a really weird, eclectic collection of stories. Some of this stuff is going to be from the Hunger Games, some of it's going to be from Game of Thrones, some of this might be from Charlotte's Web, some of this might be from lots of other places. Lots of really weird stories. They do not make sense together. Totally get that. Some of this might be from Caddyshack. Some of this might be from Roadhouse, that Patrick Swayze movie. So that's okay. Don't worry about the content so much. I want you to go through the import process and pull these stories in. But if what you get on your pages is like this just really strange collection of stories, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It's just I have about 40 different stories that I've written over the years, and so in order to give you kind of like some long stories, some short stories, some middle stories, I just kind of reached out to put everything into a bucket and then spread those out. So that's why you have like short, long, and medium-sized stories that you can use in your documents, and so that's why we're using these weird stories. So those are the stories that you import through the import process to get the content into your newsletter. Let's look at one. Let's look at like 13 here. This is from Charlotte's Web. There was a pig in Charlotte's Web that he beat in the his name was Uncle, and when Charlotte's Web, when Wilbur goes to the state fair, he beats this other pig called Uncle in the state fair. He gets like, Uncle was like the great big pig, but Wilbur got the blue ribbon. And so this is kind of like a letter to the editor. If you had the animals from the Charlotte's Web writing their own newsletter, this is basically his letter to the editor saying like, hey man, I totally was cheated out of this prize that I should have won. And so that's this weird story that you're getting there. So as far as a title of this story goes, you can think of a title that might go with this story. Who is the author of this story? Well, it's Uncle the Pig. That's the author of it. And so as you look at these, so in your byline you might say, by Uncle the Pig. Let's look at another one that's available. Let's look at like 23. This one is by just a guy that I just made up. This was for like a history club. There was one part where I basically had a fictitious history club, or kind of like a club at Western, in which go around and go on, visit battlegrounds and all sorts of stuff like that. And so this Conrad Dobler, he actually was a football player, but so this story is going to be by Conrad Dobler. You have to come up with some sort of title that would be appropriate for it, and then use the text. And again, through the import process, it's going to pull this stuff into the document for you. But you need to be creating titles for this stuff that are appropriate. Some of them, like if you get especially like the Caddyshack stories, those will have suggested titles in there, but you don't have to use those. And I don't know if there's any in here or not, but the caution here is that if like when I open your document, start reading your story, if the suggested title is like up at the top of your story, that's going to be a deduction. I want that to be out. So basically I want you to have a title that's actually in the template itself, then like who wrote the story, and then the story. So like read these basically as your quality control. Read these as you're putting those in the document, and then pull out the stuff like if there's like those fake or fictitious or recommended titles, remove those or remove those from the body of that story. Lastly, so that's how you create a newsletter. You do all those things that we've talked about to create that newsletter. You save and close it, and then lastly, there's this download this document, the written portion, which is right here, and this is a reflection piece. As you look at this, you'll see that this is something very similar to what you've done with the flyer. I want you to think about these design principles that you've been learning about from the design book and talk about how you use those in your document. And this time you have a 4-page document, so you really can get into like the repetition and the alignment and so on. And so talk about how you've used contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. This is where it gets into the newer elements out of the design book that we've been talking about. Chapter 7 of your design book talks about colors, and the different sorts of relationships between colors. They can be complementary, analogous, and so on. And so that's where you get to look at the color scheme that's in your document and talk about the colors you chose. And it may be as simple as, hey, I chose these colors because I think they look pretty together. But you need to talk about what colors are present, why you chose those, and how they help the document to be a good-looking publication. Down here in step 3, in chapters 9, 10, and 11 of the design book, we talk about different font faces and how they can be conflicting or complementary, these different relationships that can exist between your font faces. And so I want you to identify which fonts you used and the kinds of relationships that exist between. Now exclude the like the Jim Lindsay and the 320 styles as you talk about these. As we've already talked about, those are probably going to be very contrasting or very much in conflict with whatever you choose as your fonts for your document. But disregarding those two, talk about these other things. In those chapters you learn about the different categories which a typeface might come from. It could be like a modern typeface, or a serif font face, or a slab serif. So I want you to be thinking about that and telling me where what your font actually comes from. And then lastly, that relationship, which we've already talked about. Okay, lastly, if you would point out a couple of things that you think are good about your document, and then maybe something that you think is a weakness. And so that's the written portion of this assignment. So it's pretty complete. So you go back to the instructions here. So you create the document, and of course you have to create the document before you can do the reflection part of it, because the reflection part is looking at the completed document. Once you have those two things done, save them, close them, and then on Blackboard upload your items to the Blackboard page, which we have right over here. I'm sorry, on the Green Lantern project, you have that Green Lantern link right there. Hit that like you've done throughout the semester. Browse out to your completed files and attach both of them, and hit submit, please. So that's the assignment. I look forward to seeing your work. Thank you for your attention.